Hello and welcome to this live event coming to you from iAfrica TV. My name is Malik Jones and I'm delighted to sit down with the Honorable for Serrekunda West, Honorable Halifa for Serrekunda, the Honorable for Serrekunda, the Honorable Halifa Sallah. I'm so backtracking to the previous constituency arrangements, Serrekunda proper now, of course.
Serrekunda proper indeed.
Yes. The Honorable Halifa Sallah is my guest as iAfrica TV continues its continuous dosage of what we're going through, the COVID-19 pandemic, and what the Gambia is doing about it. Honorable Halifa, COVID-19 struck in December of 2019, thus the name COVID-19. As a matter of fact, so many efforts were done. Government decided to close the airport. After some while, it closed the borders. But then, as you can see, things are not what we really envisaged it to be. When you look at the situation right now, social distances is not being followed. Most of the prescriptions actually are not being followed. Shall I ask you, what went wrong?
It is important to indicate our role as National Assembly members. We do not speak for ourselves. We speak based on the evidence that we receive. We have a committee on health which went around initially to find out whether anything was being done about what WHO called a pandemic. And thereafter, the Minister of Health was invited to make a presentation as to whether Gambia really had any initiative regarding COVID-19. His initial remarks were that this was exogenous and had not reached the Gambia, but that they were making preparations in checking the borders and preparing the facilities for at least screening, but warned that COVID-19 was a killer and we should not be complacent, and that his ministry would advise the government as to what to do. That evening or thereafter, we had the president made a declaration of a state of emergency, indicating that a situation may exist that will constitute a state of public emergency. Later, after the president's speech, the minister came back to tell the nation that, in fact, the pandemic was present in the Gambia. They have identified one person who had tested positive. What followed is the National Assembly deciding to suspend proceedings, seeing that this matter was no longer an ordinary matter, and the nation had to go to the process of preparing for a disaster. And that is when, as you have rightly said, borders were closed, and screening was supposed to be done as you descend at the airport, and quarantining for 14 days started, and many measures began to be taken. We had a declaration from the president on the state of emergency, but it had measures that were to be undertaken to deal with state of public emergency. The emergency expired within 7 days. Then On the 26th, another emergency was declared, 26 March, but that declaration was brought to Parliament, and it came to Parliament for a purpose. Parliament established the fact that the state of emergency that was initially declared had expired without consultation with Parliament. And we made it very clear that the law based on state of public emergency must be respected. But you cannot respect a law that you do not understand. And what is stipulated under section 34 of the Constitution is that the president may declare that a state of public emergency may exist or that it exists. The first declaration, they say may exist. The second declaration, they say does exist. But the provision is clear that when you declare a state of public emergency, within 7 days, if the National Assembly is sitting, you should bring that declaration to Parliament for a resolution to be passed to either extend it or to revoke it. And that was not initially done, but the second one was done. And the minister's position was that they did not know that Parliament was sitting, but Parliament was sitting, and we suspended it only because the pandemic was actually declared to be present in the country, and we suspended proceedings. But the sessions were still on hold.
Was Parliament at recess during that time?
No, not recess. It has just suspended proceedings. It has just adjourned, but not adjourned sine die. So in essence then, Parliament was in session.
The Gambia had its first case in March. Did this jolted or sent a message to government and to its partners that, well, this is the time for us to buckle up. This is the time for us to look at the paraphernalia that will safeguard the people of this country?
Well, precisely so. And that's the emphasis. The state of emergency was declared and regulations were made. But this was before Parliament was consulted. And they had to come to consult Parliament. Parliament indicated that, well, they had put the cart before the horse, and that was accepted. And then the issue was to look at the state of emergency that was declared, which would expire since Parliament was sitting within 7 days, and determine whether it was any there was any reason to extend it. And that became a debate. The minister sought 90 days extension, commencing from March 26th. But the position of Parliament was 90 days was too long. And we would not know exactly what the state would do within those 90 days. It was important for Parliament to continue to exercise oversight. In that regard, Parliament agreed with 45 days. Accompanying the 45 days with the establishment of a special select committee that will monitor the regulations and see how they were being enforced. And that is precisely what happened during that period. We had a parliamentary committee that continued to monitor how the state of emergency was being managed and how the regulations were being enforced.
Did they come back to the General Assembly to tell you what their findings were, what went wrong, what went right? Did they report back to the general body?
Well, it is the executive which on the 12th of May wrote to the Speaker of the National Assembly to request for a sitting of the National Assembly. The President, under Section 98 of the Constitution, has also power, authority, to request for the sitting of the National Assembly to deal with matters of national importance. What was the matter? The matter is the state of emergency. They were given 45 days to implement, and it was about to expire. And we had told them that before expiration, it is better always to come to the National Assembly for a review, whether to extend or not to extend. And that is precisely what actually happened. We convened on the 15th of May to hear what the minister had to say regarding the issue of the state of public emergency. Since we had established a committee to monitor the 45 days, they made a presentation of their report. And it was very clear that still Gambia was not well positioned with the architecture to fight the illness. What do we mean by the architecture? The border is there, and entry must be controlled. And you've heard that, in fact, certain people who were later discovered to have the illness came across the border after the border was closed. So in that regard, you can see quite a number of the cases were cases from the outside, exogenous cases coming in. And that clearly tells you the epicenter of the illness and showing the need why the borders should be properly monitored. Of course, the committee did visit the borders and did indicate that the borders were not controlled as they should be. And the activities that should take place in those borders, especially members of parliament had explained that where there are the official borders. But what about the porous borders? Still, people were coming, and that raises the question, how secure are we against a pandemic that is expanding all over the world and moving inward and needed to be controlled? So that is one element that became very clear, that the borders are still porous and we are not very secure. You look at the fish landing site in the Khartoum area, you will see the fish meals, that the congestions are still, the congestion is still prevailing in those areas. And the markets, the garages, as if really the social distancing is not actually being respected. And that is the key issue, key element that came out of the report itself, that enforcement of the regulation is lacking. And because of that, the pandemic is here with us, threatening us, and we are yet to put up proper defenses against it.
The borders are porous, very porous, because when you look at Gambia is inside Senegal, and to man the porous areas of this country will be a monumental task. But then where there's a will, they say there's always a way. What could have been done to stop people coming through the illegal, through the porous borders? What do you think could have been done?
Well, that is a question of opinion. The mind of Parliament is simply to monitor, to find out the weaknesses, the challenges, and report back to Parliament, and Parliament will begin to look at the recommendations as to how to improve the situation. Recommendations were made, and the committee ultimately had to bow down to the will of Parliament that we do not approve the recommendation at the moment because we have committees of the National Assembly. And if you deal with porous borders and you want to put the security forces into operation, the army, for example, you know that immigration cannot alone secure the borders. The police cannot alone do that. Do you involve the army? If you're going to involve the army, what will be the terms? Because these are soldiers. How do they handle the population? How do you train them for civil operations, non-military operations? So that is an issue, which means that the committee's report will now be teased out so that all the elements of justice will go to the committee responsible for that. Element of security will go to the committee responsible for that. Element of health will go to the team. So then you will see all the elements will be handled by the committees that are already established in the National Assembly, so that they will look at the recommendation. If they are inadequate, to beef them up. And those are the recommendations that will now be incorporated in an expanded report, so that ultimately that will be presented to government to add value. But the report itself will also be accessible to government, so that they will start their own initiative, because it is government that is the policy maker. It is the government that creates strategic plan. And what government should have in place right now are the mechanisms that are required to deal with the pandemic, so that every new information that comes, especially from Parliament, will be taken by those very structures that should have been already established, so that they will use it as mental food for policy making, for strategic planning, for programming. Essentially, that is what is now expected of government, that they should have in place all the elements. There is the element in terms of declaration of a state of emergency, which requires the government to ensure that there is food security, and that the people have access to food, not at higher prices, but at lower prices, or at least prices that will not increase. So therefore, government has a mechanism, a regulation for that, and has a body responsible for exercising direction and control over the regulation. So it means that that body must be able to gather information from the public and from the other stakeholders like the National Assembly, and put those structures to be able to address those concerns. That's how a team approach could be built.
I will come to some of the measures that government has taken to mitigate the circumstances as of now, but let me take you to the treatment center. Are you surprised that there's only one treatment center for the entire country?
Well, this is what you call the architecture to combat the virus. The architecture must be multi-sectoral. You are now dealing with the health sector, and the health sector is the key sector. That key sector has the provision that you have mentioned, the instruments. It must have the institutions, and it must guide the normative practices to be able to change mindset. You've mentioned the treatment center. Before there is treatment, you must first identify the illness. And you identify the illness in such a manner that you know where it is coming from, so that you can control it and prevent it. Because what we are told is that the preventive strategy is the strategy we should adopt. Why? Because if more people get ill, we do not have treatment centers enough to be able to handle them. If we want to also observe them, if more and more are found to at least have the symptom, how would you observe them to test them in the first place? We do not have enough testing centers. As the illness emerges, one moves up with it in terms of providing methods of screening, and that is why you have the thermometers, and the thermometers will help you to at least identify that by virtue of the temperature, the threat is there. Why don't take this person for testing? So it means that there is a linkage between screening and testing. And with testing, you'll be able to identify whether there is positive identification of the illness, and then you go into treatment. Clearly, we do not have enough treatment centers if we anticipate the growth of the illness. At the moment, they are handling it. They've not told us that we have too many people that they cannot handle. But the projections, I remember in the report of the committee, the health unit is saying that the anticipation is that if we do not control the illness, 181,000 Gambians could become infected. How do you handle them? Do we have treatment centers for those? No, we do not. So the minister had told us that what may end up happening is home quarantine. Obviously, you're within the family and you are inviting disaster. So a population of 2.3 million, if you have 181,000 infected, you have the whole population infected or affected. So this is not an ordinary matter, and that is where the normative dimension lies, because we've seen that the safe spacing, or what they call social distancing, is not really being honored. Why is it not being honored? Is every illness has a start. The embryonic stage, people cannot see people dying. And therefore, people do not take it seriously that this is a serious matter. And unless they see a large number of people dying or a large number of people being ill, because the issue here, and the minister has emphasized this, is that once you are infected and the treatment does not take place at a very early stage, then you really become ill. Even if you are not dead, you will lie unable to do anything for yourself. Others will have to take care of you. So can you imagine in the family, 2, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, all falling ill, so much that they cannot do anything for themselves? What would be the state of that family? What would be the state of that community? So that is why people should not only think about the death. The doctors are not showing the state of those people who are being treated at a given stage, how ill they were. But we can see it in cyberspace, that you lose control of your sanity, you lose control of your body, and in some instances, you become mnemonic, and in actual fact, people lose hope about you.
One person died as a result of COVID-19, according to what the Ministry of Health has said. At the same time, there are projections of 181,000 people to be affected. Did the minister tell you on what did he base that projection on?
Well, you see, for us, we receive their information, and our objective is not to become doctors ourselves and question what they say. They are saying this in documents circulated all over the world. WHO is present. You have what you call peer review of what they say. And based on peer review, one will be able to know whether they are really misleading themselves among their own peers. But the essence here is they have developed a scheme of studying how the disease spread. And I can tell you, Malik, that let's look at our projections ourselves. Now, you become infected, one person, and you are within a car below of 50 people, and your infection is not known. We've heard that in Ghana, 500 workers were infected by one worker. So you can see that the individual is within a family. A family of 50, you can infect a family of 50. A family of 50 have their friends, have their neighbors, have their workmates. How many people could they infect? So you can see how it can have a multiplying effect. So it can be astronomical. So these are issues that you do not start questioning and developing some theories that these are hypotheses. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is prepare for 181,000. What would that do? It will build up your health system. You will inherit a health system that is fit for purpose. That even if the pandemic does not come,
you have a health center.
You will have
health facility.
All the regions, the testing facilities will be there. All the regions, the equipments will be there. You will have your observatory, and you can transform it into an observatory for disease control. You can train your scientists who will even not only do testing and treatment, but would also, in fact, look for ways of vaccine production. And you can be a star in the world.
You just mentioned the word vaccine, and that takes me to President Rajolina of Madagascar and the concoction that he's made and has distributed to some African countries, of which this concoction is presently undergoing some tests in Senegal. Some countries like Guinea-Bissau are using it. Tanzania, I was made to understand, are also using it. What do you know? What do you know about it?
Well, we have information, but we are not doctors. And from my own scientific conception, whenever something is discovered, we are talking about Africa now. We're talking about developing countries. We have relations with other developed countries. The opportunity is to summon the best scientists to start to look at what is seen to be a part of the process of treatment. Because at the moment, it is indicated that there is really no cure of the virus, meaning that you do not have any substance that can actually kill the virus, but you can treat it. And treatment can take many forms. Treatment can help you to build up your antibodies that can resist it. You build up resistance. So at the moment, what we know from a scientific point of view is that it is actually the resilience of the body that fights the virus, and therefore you will not fall ill. And some are even asymptomatic, that you can even have the virus and you can even transmit it, but it will not really affect you. So in that sense, we leave that to the medical fraternity and sorority to really look into this issue and guide Africa and guide the world. We do not need to make claims of success until the tests are fully done and one sees that really here are a people, by virtue of utilizing what is said to be utilized, the disease is not really affecting them. But we all know that Africa is yet to be fully affected. Why that is the case is a subject of research. But we should not be complacent, because African people in the diaspora are dying because of it. So it's not because of our black skin that we are not dying of it as much as in America. We must realize that black people, people of color in those countries are also dying because of COVID-19. So these are matters for scientists to continue to study and make correlation.
In other words, we will wait for the West to discover a vaccine and scientifically proven by the West before we Africans start using that vaccine to cure ourselves from COVID-19.
COVID-19 does not know nationality, does not know race, does not know West and East. And me and you, we know very well that America, with all its mighty military empire, is suffering from the illness more than any
other country in the world. Very well, sir.
So anybody who talks about West and East at this moment must be really misconceiving the tragedy we are facing. That COVID-19 has overwhelmed America. America needs the sympathy of the world and the support of the world to deal with the illness. And here we can discover many techniques. Dr. Samate told us that before, when you are quarantined after coming for 14 days, they will just leave you to go. But they adopted a policy of at least taking samples and continuing to do the test. And what they have discovered is that, well, some people who had been left eventually were discovered to be positive. And that was not the way they used to operate in the world before. But by that Gambian experience, they are beginning to see that, well, they should do testing, not just quarantine to look at the symptoms, but move into testing and leave those samples, and through that, you may be able to help to deal with the illness. So in short, the reason why I told you that we should take the illness as real, build up the architecture, get the equipments, I've mentioned it, to in fact create the human resource. You're not only talking about material resource, we should create the material resource, human resource, and the financial resource to fight the illness. Because if we defeat it, the next one that is going to come will be easier to defeat. The Ebola crisis. If we had built up the equipment to build up the observatory and have the scientists there, then we'll not be talking about do we have enough testing centers, because the structures will be all over the country in all the regions. So in actual fact, every crisis is an opportunity. It's a challenge. It's of course a tragedy, but it's also opportunity to prevent another one. So in essence, we should really capitalize on this to see how we can engage in social distancing, because that is mobilization of a population. This is what you call public health. Before, medicine is just curative. You get ill, you go to the doctor, he identifies the symptoms, give you the medicine, and you are cured. But how many doctors per population? And this is when the scientists saw that, well, if we know the cause, why shouldn't we prevent the illness? So rather we move into preventive strategy, and that's the public health strategy, that you involve the public, involve the population in their own health by increasing sanitation, by increasing knowledge of illness, so that when they see the symptoms themselves, they'll be able to identify, I suspect that I have something, so that they can rush to a doctor. This is the opportunity for that. That's why I'm emphasizing the normative dimension of illness. That is, how do we change our mindset and see illness as real? Even if we are not infected, we should be affected because others are infected. So in that respect, we know how to prevent ourselves from having it. So the discipline that you create in society, like some, I don't care. Well, when you have society that's not disciplined, then this is society that is under threat. And that is a society that suffers most. And you can see America by saying, this is a Chinese thing, it came from China, it's a fabrication. Now, what is happening in America? Lockdown. Their house is talking about 3 trillion from the latest readings that I've done, that they should really utilize to be able to handle the pandemic, the social ramification of the pandemic. So here we do not have a lockdown. But what is the cure? There is none. How do we prevent it? There is ample information. Is it spreading? I don't know. How much of it have we taken? I don't know. And this is what we now have to find out. That's why Parliament agreed with the minister that the enforcement of the regulations are still weak. And what do we do to ensure that the enforcement of the regulation will be fit for purpose? Well, the challenge of Parliament now is that we had to adjourn today by virtue of the fact that we have rejected the request of the minister to extend the state of emergency for another 45 days.
I was coming to that. Why did you reject it?
Well, this must be understood in its proper context, because some people say, well, some members of parliament supported, some went against, and it's like there's a divided parliament.
May I interrupt? I'm sorry. Was it bipartisan?
Well, I'm trying to analyze the situation.
Very well, sir.
Our parliament had grown beyond partisanship. And I will not accept at this stage that partisanship is emerging. We have to allow the process to go so that we can do proper evaluation. But the parliament had gone to a level where we listen to what is reasonable and justifiable, and we enter into agreement, because it is a divided parliament where no party has a majority. And in a case where the vote is 3/4 of the members of parliament, it means that 1/4 plus 1 can prevent that particular motion from being adopted. So that's not an ordinary matter. And it requires then each parliamentarian to be extremely independent in thinking and vision. Let me get to the point. We gave the state 45 days to come back to report to us. They came back to report. We do not have clear information in terms of the financial resources available at the moment to fight COVID-19. No single parliamentarian can say, I have a clear picture of the sum of money that the state now has and where that sum of money is actually located and what is going to be done with that sum of money. We cannot quantify the actual material resources available in terms of the thermometers, in terms of the treatment centers, in terms of the region, everything that you need in terms of architecture to be able to do screening, testing, and treatment. We do not have the concrete information. We do not have concrete information regarding the impact of the instruments and the viability of the instruments in terms of regulation. When I say instruments, I'm talking about the regulations. You read the regulations, you said we'll come to it, well, I will leave it there until you raise it. But essentially, we need to have these facts. Now, they come and say in 45 days, we will be able to at least improve from what we have started to do. And that is their request. Give us chance. We will build a more robust architecture to deal with COVID-19. We have started, and you can see some people feel just one is there. Even if we did nothing, no one would have died. And that's what Dr. Samate emphasized. Is that true? Could we not say that the actions we have taken now, since this is exogenous, maybe this is what had prevented what the prevailing circumstances would have been, and therefore we have a scenario which appears at this moment not to be so threatening. So in that sense then, that's what they are requesting. What should we do as parliamentarians? You ask why it was rejected. Now, it is the opinion of some members of parliament that if you give them even another 45 days, nothing will happen, because the past 45 days, they have not seen anything happening. And of course, that was not the view of the Attorney General. He kept on showing the regulations and their enforcement, that things have happened. Dr. Samate, well, that's why you have one dead and the others are being treated and they are being released. So essentially, you have divergent opinion. That really is what you expect in a parliamentary body in its relation with the executive. But we must go beyond that. And that's what I want to do now. The essence here is, when a state declares public emergency, you have to agree whether public emergency exists or it does not exist. Now, if you ask every parliamentarian today whether an emergency situation exists regarding COVID-19, whether COVID-19 is a real threat, every single one of them will say it's a real threat. Every single member of parliament, every conscious Gambian will tell you that COVID-19 is a threat. And that's what a state of emergency is. That we have a health emergency, which is a threat to life. And that's what the declaration is all about. And that's where the ignorance lies in many parts of our sectors of our society. When you say state of emergency, what is a state of emergency? State of emergency, look at it, it's declared, people are suffering. They do not know the difference between a state of emergency and regulations. A state of emergency is simply a declaration that a threat exists, full stop, under Section 34 of the Constitution. So Gambians must ask themselves, is COVID-19 a real threat? If we say that it's not a real threat, and the vast majority of people in the Gambia say it's not a real threat, then let's drop all our guards and just go our normal life. Then there is no problem in the Gambia. Then Gambia is problem-free. But if Gambians accept that COVID-19 is a threat, then all Gambians accept that a state of public emergency exists. Therefore, it is declared, then you should know that it should be declared. So no one should lack any support for a declaration of a state of emergency. Now the question is, how long should a state of emergency exist? There too, there is a lot of ignorance. Because, listen very carefully to Section 34. It says that the president, if he realizes that a state of public emergency exists or may exist, he should declare it so. After that declaration, if National Assembly is in session, within 7 days it lapses. And he must come to the National Assembly for extension. And National Assembly should ask this question, is there a threat? If the National Assembly also accepts, it extends. Now, if the National Assembly is in session, then it lasts for 21 days. And National Assembly should be in session to extend, otherwise it lapses. If National Assembly is still not in session, then the president can declare another state of emergency, which will last for another 7 days. It goes on like that. That's what the state of emergency is all about. But when he declares a state of emergency, he should not announce that schools are closed, these are closed, like it was done in the first instance. That was an error, because there is no provision in Section 34 that empowers the president to do that. And that was criticized in the National Assembly.
Who makes the regulations?
Well, I'm coming to the next phase. That's the next phase. Thank you very much for raising the question. The first phase, Gambians must understand what a declaration of state of emergency is. I hope now all of us know what it is. It's simply a declaration. It's word on paper, word in the Gazette, full stop. Now, once it is declared, then the president becomes empowered to make regulations under Section 35 of the Constitution. But it is important for one thing to be clear, so that people will not be frightened by declaration of state of emergency, especially National Assembly members.
It's a paper tiger.
And National Assembly members should be educators of the people. Before they can be educated, they also must be clear in what they are saying. And if anybody doubts what I'm saying now, I challenge you to this forum, and you people will organize the forum, all the media, so that we make this clear. National Assembly members should not be in a state where we are antagonistic to each other or come to a point where we vote on partisan basis. There is no need for that, because we are elected as individuals. And even though through parties, when we in the National Assembly, we under Section 112 should put the national interest and conscience at the top of our decision-making process. So to come to the decision there, it is very important to understand that the state of emergency we have power to revoke it anytime. Under Section 34, subsection 5, first under subsection 3, the president has power to revoke the state of emergency anytime. Under subsection 5, we, the National Assembly members, who pass a resolution to extend it, even if we extend it for 90 days, for 100 days, for 1 year, we have power any day to revoke it. So what is the significance of the number of days? When we, the National Assembly members, have the power to revoke it. And under Section 97, Section 98, we can convene our meetings. So therefore, we have all the authority to manage a state of emergency. And National Assembly members should not be in any way appear to be disorganized and in a disarray. That's impermissible. It's unpardonable. So we go to the element of the regulations. That's where the power lies. And that's where the fear comes. And justifiable fear. And that is why the Constitution says that the regulations must be reasonably justifiable to deal with the matter that is in issue, that is at issue. So in essence, Section 35 says that there should be an act of the National Assembly that will empower the president to be able to make regulations. And that is the Emergency Powers Act. It exists, but not done even now since 1965. Is that all? So it empowers the president to make regulations. And once those regulations are made, then they are enforced. Because there are regulations which can even uproot some of our rights. That's where the danger lies. That you are empowering the president by virtue of the state of emergency to have power to do things that he will not have power to do in a state of normalcy. Those are the dangers. That's why we must have our guards. We must not lose our guards. So in essence then, it is important to understand that the president, by virtue of the fact that he can make regulations, once he makes them, it should be published in the Gazette. Then it will be enforced. But if we are sitting as a parliament, within 7 days, he must bring both the emergency and the regulations for extension. For the regulation for affirmation, to affirm that we agree with it. But if we reject the state of emergency, then the regulations also would fall. So it means that the National Assembly would be the authority who will look at the emergency powers and then ensure that if they are not fit for purpose, force the state of emergency, if it's not fit for purpose, to declare it null and void, refuse to extend it, and then the regulations will also disappear.
As we speak, government has been trying for an extension. Bring us up to date. What happened?
It is important that they wanted 45 days. They pleaded for it. And if you look at it, as I've said, we do not know the finances available. We do not know the material resources available. We do not know whether the instruments are actually having the impact for which they were made. So the National Assembly should still be interested in following the process to know the facts. They said, give us 45 days and all these elements will be present. It's left to us. And some people feel, give them the 45 days. Some people feel, reduce it. And that is where the debate lay. And ultimately some said, they don't want to have it. Let it be abrogated completely. And by rejecting it, we've abrogated it. Now, the question lies, is it reasonable to do that? Well, you will answer the question, they will answer the question. My answer is,
No.
It's not reasonable.
It's not reasonable.
Why is it not reasonable?
The health of the Gambian people coming
everybody, well, if you ask anybody, is COVID-19 real?
Absolutely.
They will say yes. Is it a threat? They say yes. So, should we abrogate a state of public emergency? No. Should we look at the regulations? Yes. Because the regulations can affect people in different ways. And that is what we need to scrutinize. So here we've rejected something, not because people do not agree that that should exist, but for some reason it will explain why. But the process that it took must be clear to all. We have a committee, a special select committee, which had in its recommendation 21 days. The minister came with 45 days. But in Parliament, you must make a motion for a matter to be considered. But this matter is not a matter that Parliament brought. Even this, the sitting was not at the instance of Parliament. It was at the instance of the executive. The executive saw that the 45 days will soon expire and they do not want it to lapse. So they came to Parliament so that before it lapses, we extend it. That's their provision. Now, if Parliament says, no, before you even make your motion, we are going to give you 21 days, then what is the use of the executive coming to Parliament? Ask me why I'm asking that question.
May I?
It is a simple matter that if the executive left the matter to expire, to lapse, at that material time, before we convened the sitting, Parliament was not in session. Then the executive had the constitutional authority to declare a state of emergency, which will last for 21 days. Now, the executive had power to have 21 days. Why would it waste all that time to come to Parliament to look for 21 days?
You would have given it to them on a silver platter.
They would have taken it. It's not given them, it's the Constitution that
gives it to them.
Listen very carefully again. The Constitution says that the 45 days, if it lapses and Parliament is not sitting, then the President can declare a state of emergency, which will last for 21 days.
And not the 7 days.
It goes beyond the 7 days. If we are sitting,
very well,
then it's 7 days. If we are not sitting, then if we are not in session, then it goes for 21 days. So therefore, they came for a purpose. And that is why we said, let's suspend our own resolution and leave the minister to at least move his motion. And if he moves the motion, now if members of Parliament, there were members of Parliament who felt that the 45 days was too much and they prefer something less, they would have stood up and said, no, we would want to make a motion so that the minister will consider what we will agree with. Then we can engage in some form of horse trading at that time, where we will say, well, why don't we accept 30 days, minister? That's what we did in the first instance. He came with 90 days, and then we pin him down to 45 days. Now he came with 45 days. You could have tried to pin him down to 30 days or so, but not to insist that what you say as a Parliament is what is going to happen, and what you are saying as a Parliament is what they would have even if they don't come to Parliament. That is not reasonable.
Parliament was adjourned today because the minister did not turn out, or the government representative did not turn out. What happened?
Well, it is this sitting,
crisis.
This sitting came at the instance of government. It's the executive that sat down and said, well, let me go to Parliament before this lapses. I also want to revise the budget. I also want supplementary appropriation. It is the executive that did that, and they came. You reject their motion. And all these are interconnected to something that is dealing with an emergency situation. So it's, in a way, you create a situation of uncertainty. Now, some members of Parliament want to remedy the situation. They wanted to move a motion so that they will recommend a particular number of days. But once we reject the first motion, our standing orders 29, does not permit for you to bring another motion on that same question during the same session. Before you can do that, you must rescind rescind the motion that was already rejected so that it stands null and void, then you can do that. And that was the issue today. Somewhere actually engaging in discussion to see how they could move Parliament, because the current situation of Parliament rejecting a declaration of a state of public emergency, that means that Parliament is saying that COVID-19 is not a threat. You know, that will not leave Parliament, especially in the world. Maybe ordinary Gambians who are yet to understand what that means technically. But technically, that does not give a good image to our National Assembly. And that's why there was discussion. And because time was being taken without anybody telling the Speaker that we have resolved anything at the level of the members, I believe the Speaker saw that since we have a quorum, just came in, and then Parliament started. And the next thing is she relied on Standing Order 13.1, which says that the Speaker can adjourn Parliament to decide to adjourn the session until tomorrow. So one would believe that tomorrow, before then, parliamentarians would have engaged in discussions to see what is the right thing to do, because it is important for Parliament to continue to monitor the regulations, and that is the committee that was established to study the situation. After the report, issues of lumos were raised, and what was the reaction of the minister? The minister said, well, lumos are open markets. They should not be closed. We will work with the local government to see how they can be open so that they can operate. That's the joy of Parliament. You are raising the issues of the constituency, and the executive is bargaining with you as to how to mitigate certain things. For example, issue of the closure of mosques and churches came to the fore. And there is strong feeling in Parliament that really it is draconian to close a mosque or a church. But we understand the principle of what we call social distancing or safe spacing. So what you want in the mosque, in the church, is not for people to gather, get congested, and infect each other. How do you achieve that? It's very simple. You do not have to close the mosque. You could just say that you are managing, restricting the gathering in those institutions. And then you discuss with the leaders of the Islamic and Christian community and say, well, in order not to keep the mosque and churches open in the meantime, as we fight this pandemic, until it is safe to gather again, why don't you have the head of the mosque committee, those who are the people in charge in the churches, that they can go during those activities. So it will be about 5 or 6 or 10 people, or much less, so that they will have their mask. They will know exactly where you allocate a space for them, that this is where you are, so that even if you have it, you'll bring along your own prayer mat or whatever is needed in the church. So in that respect, at least they will call for prayers and everything will be normal. So, and when that was raised, the minister said, well, the regulations are not sacrosanct. With discussion, you can see with amendments. And those amendments had this impact. And clearly, look at what the regulations are. Let me leave you to ask them, and then I'll answer.
Let me take you to the regulations still. People are not following the regulations. You're not surprised. Government has reduced the price of fuel so that drivers can actually take lesser passengers, but drivers are taking more passengers now. They're not adhering to that. The issue of social distancing is not being adhered to, and some people are clandestinely operating places that take more than 15, 20 people. This is going on. I don't know whether you're aware of it.
Well, you had all the information at the National Assembly. Everything you have said is precisely why some people say, since we are not enforcing it, then there's no use for it. Well, there's no use for safe spacing, social distancing, There's no use to stop handshaking so that to spread the illness. Certain remarks you don't expect for somebody who is actually thinking. And that's not an insult. If you are thinking, you know that safe distancing is necessary at the moment and you are exercising it. And some National Assembly, you saw them put on their mask, you are putting on your mask and you say that you don't need safety. You need safety. We all need safety. They give you sanitizers and you take it, and the National Assembly give it to you, take it and you use it. Well, and you are washing your hand and you are happy that the whole country is now engaged in washing hands. They love it and they are doing it. Well, clearly, when we debate, we must be focused. So, to answer your question, there are 5 basic regulations at the moment. There is one that deals with the open markets and the markets. And the aim there was to decongest the markets to encourage safe spacing, social distancing. That is the objective. It is not being attained, but it is the objective. There is nothing wrong in having a noble objective. Even if you are not attaining it, it's a goal to reach, because the issue came and nobody expected it. So you don't expect willy-nilly everybody to abide by what is happening. What is necessary now is, after you create the mechanism, then you start studying the mechanism and improve on it. As you can see, first it was those selling food. Now they said, well, those will come. All this came out of debate. All of us were talking in media houses, and of course policymakers will take some of the issues and then came to a point and say, well, why don't we, to prevent poverty to increase, we'll say some will come in the morning, some will come in the afternoon. Of course, still people are crying, no, bring all of us together in the morning up to a given time. But what will be the impact of that in terms of congestion? The objective is the safe spacing. Any act that defies that is not the right thing to do. Even if you don't achieve it, well, the right thing to do is to have the safe spacing. So we need to continue to interrogate that and help people to understand. And the other objective is, if you cannot fit all of them there, can you not create temporary shelters for markets, etc., to abide by the safe spacing? So this is how policy develops to make regulation work. And National Assembly should be thinking to give the recommendation that will help the executive to move towards implementation of those regulations. Not to say that this is yours, implement it. If you look at the issue of safe spacing in the markets, sanitization of the markets, cleansing the markets, that's the role of the councils. But did the executive sit with the councils to find out what will be required, material, human, and financial resources? That's my concern. And that's what had not happened during the past 45 days. And now is the time that we give those ideas to Parliament, to the executive, that now go and sit with the councils. Identify from the regulation, because you are saying that garages should be sanitized, markets should be sanitized, all those public places that the council control should be sanitized. How much do you need to be able to get all that chemical to be able to do that? What about the people who will carry it out? What about all the gloves and things that they will need? How many times? So in that sense, you'll be able to sit down and prepare a budget. And it's that budget that should be properly reviewed. And it's that budget that if you cannot afford it yet, you can go to your stakeholders abroad and say, we want to fight this, but this is how we want to fight it, but this is what we allow. So in short, that is what we need now in terms of the market issue. Secondly, is the essential commodities. How to make sure that they are retained and the prices at least normalized. Well, it should not be at the risk of the business person. But now is the time that you can help those people who are engaged in businesses. Those, for example, who are importing drugs. You can come to their aid. You can say that, well, let's import large quantity. You don't have the money to import. Well, why can government work with its partners, IMF, World Bank, EU, etc., and said, well, the importers of drugs will need this amount of money. We want to provide it on a loan basis. Since they import at this level, that's what they can afford. Now we'll give it to them for a whole year, and what they used to import on a quarterly basis, they will pay to government. These are the mechanisms. The same thing with the rice, etc. Do we look for other countries where, in fact, the prices will be much lower, and government will enter into negotiation for those companies who will be doing it? So these are issues that you can treat during such circumstances. Not only that, you've dealt with the issue of transportation. Well, you need cost-benefit analysis. At the Ministry of Trade, you must have people sitting who would be able to sit down and say, for a transport to move from Serrekunda to Banjul, it will consume how many liters? Each transport, you will calculate and get to the average. How many liters do you consume to travel 1 kilometer? That should be it. So, or if you have 1 liter, how many kilometers would you travel? We have done some study, crude ones, and we got up to 11 kilometers for a liter, for a normal transport. Now, if that is the case, you can calculate from Banjul to Serrekunda how many kilometers and how much liters of petrol you can consume. Now you can then regulate in the transport. If you have this number, 3 people, 4 people, if they pay, how much are you going to get from it? Now, if that is the case, you calculate and say that it's a loss, then you look at the petrol and say that if I reduce the price of petrol to this, then you'll be able to recover your loss. That is the type of scientific analysis you need to build up. That competence must be built up at this stage to deal with COVID-19. This is what is required. And this is what the National Assembly must tell the executive and assist them to do. If you look at the issue of the schools and we've already mentioned the mosque, etc. By giving them these ideas, if they implement it, who will go against the regulation to save life? The same thing with the schools. You need to check at this moment, even put 1035 or something where people will call that my child is not learning because we don't have a radio. So you can quantify the number of radio stations, or are you going to say now you just use the television for some and radio for others? But you must ensure that everyone is catered for. And this is what you make a project to even provide radio for households that do not have radio. So in essence, that is the budget that deals with COVID-19. You must have a budget for COVID-19. And it must be an extra budgetary issue. How do you create that? It becomes an extra budget for COVID-19. How do you manage that as a project? How do you audit that? Because you had the minister talking about possibility of squandering the resources. The threat is there. But that is not the role of a minister. He has gone extra mile to ensure that his name will not be tarnished. But in actual fact, you should have a project. You'll have its whole financial unit and how it operates, and it must be audited, and ultimately it must come to Parliament for review. Because the Auditor General will get all the information that is necessary to ensure that Parliament gets the information.
On a final note, since you've touched on this pecuniary aspect, the Honorable Minister on Saturday blew the whistle saying that there has been some level of corruption by people working within the civil service. How did the National Assembly took that?
Yes, you see, he was expressing, of course, an opinion. You come to National Assembly to deal with corruptions, with documents showing, and then we have a public finance and public accounts committee that can instruct the Auditor General to really look into certain key issues, especially now. I don't want to start saying what the committee should do. They know what they're supposed to do. So we have so many powers. The Auditor General also has so many powers. powers that you can call for special audits. President has power for commission of inquiry. National Assembly can also recommend commissions of inquiry. So in essence, all the tools are there to be able to follow up, identify what is wrong, discover, and do something about it. So what is important then is the opinion. You do not take what the opinion as fact. You take it as, let's call it an alarm, as a bell that rings, saying that, well, we must do something about it. And you can see, as National Assembly members, we are saying the Minister of Finance should now be alert. You have many units, internal audit units, and how do we expand that dimension? The Accountant General has certain powers in terms of information gathering regarding finances. So we are saying, put your house in order. All the tools are there, the instruments are there. Harness them, apprehend them, and utilize them. That is what the debate between the executive and parliament is all about. It must be a very constructive debate, and as a result of that, we'll create the mechanism to be able to get the fact that we can give the journalists and say, this is the corruption, this is the corrupt person, he's been taken to court, or he's been instructed to pay it back into the government coffers. All that is there, but the opportunity is now available in a parliament that has finally discovered its powers. What it needs to do is to utilize those powers with wisdom so that we will not squander the powers. And that is precisely what we hope tomorrow we will at least inspire each other to do.
We will end it up with this final question. What will you like to advise your colleagues in the National Assembly as well as government for us to create the enabling environment to deal with COVID-19?
Well, Gambia has a very unique opportunity now. You have a parliament where no force has majority. So whatever decision we are going to make must be done in concert. It's either we are effective or we are irrelevant. And if we are irrelevant, we should all resign and pack our books and say, well, we will never make a decision. Because if we meet and say, what I say is what must happen, or I say what I say which must not happen, you will not have three-quarter majority, you will not have absolute majority. So at the end of the day, the parliament will make no decision. A parliament that cannot make any decision is irrelevant to the nation. So that is the advice colleagues must realize. The parliament we now have is a parliament that can shape the destiny of the Gambia. It is so powerful, and this power is recognized by the executive. Throughout these 45 days, the ministers were in parliament being questioned. They have sent all reports, they have written all information. You've seen me read, in fact, we were talking about the environment, read all the figures. Well, they sent the report to our special select committee. We knew exactly then what took place. We can look at the Public Finance Act and say, well, Minister, this is how environment is done. Yes, environment is authorized, but it is done in this way and this way, this way. So if you did something and there's no consultation, if the vote controllers are not participating in the process, well, accept. Yes, this is how you used to do things, but it cannot be business as usual anymore because you have people who are alert, studying every aspect of what should happen, and they will not compromise what should happen. So with that, the executive will become serious, and they are serious. They are taking parliament seriously. You see parliamentarians making certain very serious allegations, even remarks that offends the minister, but they will still come because parliament has authority for them to come, not to come to be insulted. They can divide that because Section 77 also empowers them to talk. If you are accused of corruption, you can stand there as a minister and say, well, that is not true to the parliamentarian. Produce the facts. So that type of relationship where the executive defends its integrity, parliament defends its integrity, then the public space will be open and democratic, and people will get correct information. That is the advantage of the country that we must not lose, because once we sink into this small way of thinking of partisanship, then obviously we will lose the cause. And this parliament will lose the opportunity that no parliament ever had in the Gambia.
The state of emergency has expired.
Well, there are different ways of calculation. From the angle of the executive, they deem it expired on the 18th. From Parliament, they are mentioning about other dates. So since tomorrow, Parliament is meeting, I'm sure that will be an issue in terms of the state of emergency. How do you calculate? Because it's an issue of calculating time. And we entered into that discussion yesterday because the minister requested for an extension of the state of emergency. And in his motion, you will see that it was as of 26 March. So as per his motion, it's 26 March. Now, if you gazette it, it is saying a state of emergency, you start the counting on section 34 from the beginning of the declaration. So if you're starting from that calculation, and of course we approved it in April, so some may begin to count it from 3rd April. But essentially, it's just thinking. There is the correct way of assessing it, and that correct way we're saying that Section 32 of the Interpretation Act indicates very clearly that in computing time, that you must exclude excluded days, and the excluded days are Sundays and holidays. So you must start from the day of the counting, excluding the holidays and Sundays until you get the 45 days, then that's the expiration date. So those are the calculations, I'm sure, the mathematics of the law that parliamentarians will engage in tomorrow to convince ourselves of what type of Gambia we will deal with tomorrow.
Honorable Sallah, it's been a pleasure to have you on this platform. Thank you very much for being my guest.
Thank you very much. We are always available.
That was the Honorable Halifa Sallah, the member of the National Assembly for Serrekunda. He's been talking to iAfrica TV on COVID-19 and what the Gambia is doing about this unseen enemy. From me, Malik Jones, bye-bye.
My name is Saul Fraser. I was born on the 19th of January 1977 in Banjul, so that makes me a Capricorn. In my early years, I went to nursery school in Serrekunda Sabiji, also joined Serrekunda Sabiji Primary School. One of the memories that's stuck in my mind since then is that during that time, my school was like an unfinished building. There was no doors fixed, there was no windows fixed. The reason why I remember it so well is that my grandfather, who raised me up, unlike many parents who would fix a lighter table and a chair for the children to be able to carry it home, my grandfather went and picked the heaviest wood and eventually became the heaviest table and chair for me to carry. And I used to walk close to 2 kilometers from home and taking this to my school. Then my mother decided that we are going to move to Sweden, which we did around about 90. My life in Sweden was very interesting. I was a semi-professional football player, went to school, and also saw my mother working very, very hard. She would work night shifts, day shifts, working at train stations. That made me realize the importance of becoming successful in life. I wanted to work so hard, study so hard, so that I could one day take care of my mother for all the sacrifices that she made for us. Is Sweden the right place for me to succeed? I started looking at England. When I moved to England, I started my university degree, but during that time I was also working part-time in a sandwich shop, making sandwiches early morning from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then leave from 9 a.m. to university, then from university connect to my second job. When I graduated from Regents Business School, I was lucky to enroll in a graduate trainee scheme. A graduate trainee scheme is one of those that a company will take you on and train you, fast track you to become a junior manager for a period of 12 months. It was successful. I joined a company called ASLIP. That's the Association for Information Management. I had the accounts of BBC, Pfizer, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Oxford universities to manage. The money I saved up working part-time during the time I was studying, I used it to send it back home after my mother recommendation a relative to buy a piece of land for me. I don't need to continue with the story. Like many other people back then, came home to the Gambia on holidays and realized that my hard-earned money was lost. I was angry, frustrated, and totally disappointed. This would have now become very important later on in my life. I regrouped, went back to UK, and got extra motivated to work harder. I worked, saved up some more money, bought another piece of land, and built that house. When the house was ready, the desire to move back home became stronger. So I started looking at opportunities, looking at job offers online. But the company that stuck in my mind was Access Bank. After working at Access Bank for close to 6 months, the house that I built whilst I was in the UK, which I've moved into, was having water issues. I was then put in contact with an Indian company who dig boreholes. We got into a conversation, and during that conversation, they mentioned that they were about to build 200 houses on the opposite side of my house. And right there, I started thinking, you know, what are the possibilities of us working together? I asked them what their plans were in terms of the selling, marketing, and promoting of these houses. And they didn't have any idea. All they wanted to do was build. So I recommended that, okay, why don't they choose to build, and I will now become the sales, marketing, and promotional person for them. Had my proposals ready, and all I wanted then was to become their sole and exclusive agent for that particular development. We agreed on a target that I had to meet within the first 3 months, and upon successfully meeting that target, I could now become their agent. A week or two after the meeting, the annual trade fair at the stadium was taking place. I put together a promotional package, took a stall, already started my company called Global Properties, and started displaying these products and services. One gentleman came and bought 10 houses straight away from us, and some other people bought as well. But that became another turning point for me, because that meant that I secured an exclusivity agreement with my then partners, and now. That's how the journey started. But since then, up to now, we've been involved with 40 different developments, not only in Gambia, but in Senegal and in Ghana. From that time up to now, which is 14 years, we became sale agents, partner developer, and now to actually developers. As a child, I remember selling fish cakes for my mom. From there, my first job in Sweden became to work in a factory, just packing glasses. Fast forward, went to England, working at a restaurant, sandwich shop. Then started a small company in the UK called UK Gambians, to coming back home and then starting Global Properties. Never heard who's seen a baby being born and they say she's a lawyer or he's a doctor or anything like that. No matter where you're born, where you're from, what your experience is, good or bad, it is possible to succeed in life. And if I can do it, so can you.